on behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. Welcome to members and guests. Welcome to our speaker, Keith Mines of the U.S. Institute of Peace. The topic tonight is Haiti, one of the most troubled countries on earth. Haiti, which is 700 miles from Florida, has long been a case of the perfect storm. It's been beset by earthquakes, floods, poor governance, a president assassinated, and a capital now overrun by gangs. Keith Mines has written that our guest has written in his book, in fact, Haiti has to be experienced to be understood. He and his family lived in the former residence of Haiti's last dictator, Raoul Cedras, high above Port-au-Prince in 1995 to 1996. The State Department had rented his quarters for $6,000 a month as part of from Cedras, as part of a deal to get Cedras out of his job. Keith has been in the military or diplomatic service for 32 years and has served in some of the toughest trouble spots on earth: El Salvador, Somalia, Darfur, Sudan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And he came out of this with not just a positive attitude, but a big message. And the message is in the title of his book, and that is Why Nation Building Matters. The book is unique. It tracks Keith's assignments overseas, and it describes the crisis zones he's been in very down-to-earth language, and it provides a history of the place and the lessons learned for Americans, about America's role there. Keith, if you could just hold up the book so that people could see it. It's the University of Nebraska Press. I highly recommend it. It's a very good read. Keith, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. It's really a privilege to be here tonight. I love these World Affairs Councils. We try to get as connected to these sorts of things as we can. And I love to hear back from people how they're seeing a crisis like Haiti that we've been working on quite hard for the last couple of years now. The story about the residents in Haiti was actually, it's a good Foreign Service story. And funny, I just ran into a guy that was in the meeting that led to that. So if you remember, there was the coup against Aristide in '94. So he had come in briefly, post Duvalier, gets set up as president. The generals didn't like that, so they kicked him out. And then we were trying for a couple of years to get him back in. There was a couple of false starts, and we finally got to the point where we were ready to intervene if that was what it took. And so Colin Powell, Sam Nunn, and Jimmy Carter came down to Haiti and met in the Cedras residence where we later lived. And they had the deal, they thought, all the way sealed. And then his wife, who was a really tough negotiator, said, we're not doing any deals today. It's my son's birthday. We're going to go celebrate the birthday. You all can come back tomorrow. All right. So they come back the next day, and they still thought they had the deal very close. And then they said, well, we need some seed money to get started here to go live our new life abroad. And they said, we'll sell our 3 properties to you. They had a beach property, a mountain property, and then this house in Peggyville above Port-au-Prince. So they're trying to make this deal. And, Powell, Carter, and Nunn said, I mean, we buy a house, a couple houses from these guys. How hard can that be? Well, they went back to the State Department and the Pentagon, and everybody said, you got to be kidding. We have no fund for buying houses from former dictators. We don't care what is at stake here. And they said, we're ready to intervene in this country. This would preclude an intervention and fighting. Sorry, can't do it. So they went back and said, there's no way to do this. But the wife said, well, how about if we rent the houses to you? So that's what they did. They rented the houses, and it went right into the embassy normal housing pool, which is very strange. Anyway, so we lived there for a few years. It was quite an odd house, frankly, and hard place to get comfortable. Anyway, let me just, if I could, I'll share a couple slides here. So the Institute of Peace in Washington was founded by Congress as a publicly funded bipartisan institute established by Congress in 1984. It was actually established by veterans of combat from World War II that felt like we spent a little too much on defense and a little bit not enough on, maybe not enough on peace. So they put together this institute. It fulfilled a dream by George Washington, who I first mentioned this in the 1790s. As he was leaving office, he said he thought we needed to do a better job of training our young people, especially in the art of peace. So it was kind of a dream that was hanging out there for a long time. A couple hundred years later, we fulfilled it. We worked through convenings, analysis, good offices during conflict, peace education, field work. We have a very good convening space in Washington. That's our building. If you haven't seen it, come by sometime. I'll give you a tour. It's actually a stunning combination of office building, but also a monument to peace. And the architect was Moshe Safdie, famous architect, Israeli-Australian guy that wanted to build into the building the kind of the basis for peace. So it's got a ton of light, transparency, colleagues can see each other, nobody works in private, and then it's got bridges everywhere. So the whole bridge building part of peace building is built into the office. In Latin America, we've been active in Colombia for the past 20 years. That was our main country for the longest time. And then in the last 5, we have added Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Northern Central America, and most recently Haiti. I just got back from Venezuela last week. That was actually a very interesting trip, another crisis that needs needs some attention and has, again, like Haiti, a very complicated set of options going forward. We work by our mandate. Our mandate from Congress puts us in the gray areas of conflict. So not just violent conflict, which is what we have focused on in many places, but also social political conflicts that in places like Haiti and Venezuela are leading, frankly, to warlike indicators without war. It's not a simple matter of polarization. It is also many in the hemisphere kind of bristle when you talk about polarization. In the case of Haiti, it's really a straightforward breakdown of governance and the lack of tools to reestablish it. So we're all prisoners of our history. Haiti probably more than most. And if I could just run through a kind of a brief outline of how I've experienced Haitian history and kind of the key points there. It is, again, I think it's a little bit more a prisoner of history than many countries in the hemisphere. In the 19th century, of course, Haiti suffered from isolation and privation after gaining independence from France in the early 1800s. It's kind of glossing over a whole lot of history. But in the 20th century, then, of course, there was U.S. occupation, which I think was a mixed blessing and curse, followed by more isolation and then 2 generations of dictatorship at times supported by the U.S. in a Cold War context. Baby Doc finally gives up power in 1986, but the destruction that he and his father had wrought on the political process and civil society, I think, cannot be in any way underestimated. They had simply crushed any organizing entity or principle, and they really caused violence in politics to be ingrained. It was something that Haiti has had a hard time now getting away from. So starting in 1994, kind of a fresh start with the election and then the restoration of Aristide. So he's elected, then kicked out, then restored with U.S. assistance. He passes off after a few years to Preval in 1996. Lots of ups and downs in the last 30 years, but there were times when things were moving in the right direction. The time that people point to, I think, as much as anything, was the second Preval administration just before the earthquake. As I left in 1997, it appeared to me that there was a need for a very long-term accompaniment to help Haiti to build the institutions that it didn't have. There's a very good article that I would really recommend in Christianity Today in the April edition. I thought the print edition was clearer, but the online has got the same argument. But it's called "What Evangelicals Owe Haiti." It was a very powerful article in the sense that it talked about how, and this is not an argument against assistance, but it's just a reality that Haiti has. That it talked about how there was always a temptation in Haiti to go down and just internationalize the things that people were frustrated that weren't working in Haiti, and this impatience with not wanting to build the institutions of government has really hamstrung Haiti. The article was very strong about this, and it suggested that the churches and others that are involved in Haiti ought to rethink some of that. And the statistic that struck out to me this is from Paul Farmer's book, the humanitarian medical guy that was very active in Haiti for years, passed away a few years ago, but has written extensively about it. Was very involved after the earthquake. But the statistic that he shared was that 99% of post-earthquake assistance went through private hands, only 1% to the government. So again, the governing institutions for health and education and everything else just never really cohered, and it's been just a long-term issue. So that was something that I think, we saw some of that when I was there the first time, and then as I followed it later on, you can see where that played out. So anyway, you had Aristide a second time, then Preval again, and then the earthquake. The earthquake really led to a dissolution of political and social order, and the scale of destruction. I mean, we all kind of remember it. I was in Mexico at the time, and I remember we had kind of like reverse grocery stores where people would go to the grocery store and then we'd come to a place and put all of our bags of food and stuff. It was a very inefficient way of doing it, again, as I think it often has been in Haiti, but we'd put stuff into boxes and then they'd go sort it out, and would have been easier, I think, just to give them money to do bulk shipments. But people wanted to feel like they were helping, so they wanted to show up at a place and give a car full of assistance for Haiti. So people really tried to help, but the scale of destruction was just off the charts. I mean, it was 20,000, it was hundreds, tens of thousands killed, but it was really just a destruction of the political order, the social order, and something that Haitians never quite recovered from. That was then followed in 2017, as the notes for this session mentioned, by the pullback of the international community. And that was really a critical thing. The country was kind of getting back on its feet. Things were at least functional. The gangs had been brought to bay. The Brazilians had been there. The Chileans had been there leading the peacekeeping mission. And there was still quite a few troops on the ground, which provided the essential security that the country needed. And then the United States cut all of our peacekeeping missions way back in 2017. That led to kind of the collapse of the UN mission. All they had the resources for after that was a very small international mission of police advisors and some things like that. So it wasn't, and a very small political mission. It just wasn't enough to really give the country what it needs. The gangs filled in the gaps there, and it was really an opening for chaos. Then there was a missed election and some real shenanigans at the top of the country, and then the assassination, of course, of President Moise in July 2021. The freshly appointed prime minister at the time, Ariel Henry, becomes the de facto head of government and state. And that is really where the political struggles that we're in the middle of now started. So 2 full years it's been without an effective government and without an elected government. And the country's really just struggled ever since then to reset. So just to recap here, badly broken state, never really had the chance to cohere. It's really a longer term situation, decades, I think, not months. There was some of the mandates when I was there that were for 4 months. We would reset them every 4 to 6 months. It was a very strange way to do business in a place that really needed that long-term assistance mission. And the assistance itself, I think it was delivered in good faith, but there was not a real effective way to receive it. We didn't, and the Haitian government didn't really develop inside Haiti the capacity to really use the assistance effectively. The Afghans struggled with that as well. I was there in 2002, and Ashraf Ghani at that time actually was the Minister of Economy. He was trying to figure this out, like how do we build the internal structure we need to receive this aid, to coordinate it, and all of that. So that was something that many countries that we've tried to lavish with a lot of assistance have struggled with. But I came away looking at it, the humanitarian stuff is consistent. Economics and trade kind of came and went, wasn't as effective, or wasn't as good as it could have been, but there was always a lot of room for economic and trade development. Talk about that in a second. The government management, as I said, was always difficult, international coordination, and then the security system that never quite cohered. And then what I call political consolidation, I think that's the part that's always the hardest to achieve. A lot of the institutions, if we do go in with advisors and with assistance, we can kind of keep them viable, but getting political consolidation where the different players are okay with the system, supportive, the people are connected. That's a real long-term, really tough thing. And then civil society was something that I'll talk about that in a second, but it was something that you just noted was really kind of foreign heavy. A lot of churches, a lot of other organizations function mainly because the international community was there, but on their own, they were very weak. But that's something that developed as well. So here's a couple of just judgments that I come away with. I was there a few months ago and have been working at pretty consistently since, meeting with a lot of Haitians as they come up here, and we have a team on the ground. So the first one is that Haiti's not a failed state yet. I was asked at a CNN interview recently whether Haiti was a failed state, and in a knee-jerk reaction, I answered yes. But I've rethought that. I don't think that is the case. Haiti has an unelected government that doesn't control all the country's territory. It's at the extreme low end of functionality, but it's not yet Somalia, where the government did collapse completely. And in the business of reconstruction, having a government of some sort is no small thing. But given the power of the gangs in Port-au-Prince and how close they are to the National Palace, how little counterforce there is to them, and the opaque connection they have to political leaders, a Somali style collapse of governance is not out of the question. One's hearing the concept that Haiti's gangs have now become warlords, going from criminal activity to govern. Now, this is also very different in the north and the south. So you will hear that in Cap Haitien in the north and Jacmel in the south, out on the Claw, there is a much better situation. This is very Port-au-Prince centric. But that said, Port-au-Prince is not only the bulk of the population, but it also is, the port, and it controls much of what is happening even in the north and south. But they are in a less gang infested situation. So there's still credible scenarios in my mind in Haiti that would require a small international force and 18 months of hard work to reestablish governance and security. After the Somalia collapse that I worked on briefly, it took the better part of 25 years. So governance of some sort is really something that I think we ought to not take for granted and not allow to slip any further than it has to. The second one is the political and security reset need to go hand in hand. There's always been this chicken and egg question about which comes first. Do we have to do security first, or do we do politics first? And I think people are really leaning in on doing security first. The problem with that is that now the government is so unsupported by the Haitian people and so controversial that there's a concern that any restoration of security is going to do nothing but prop up a non-elected and unpopular government. So people are really kind of toying with this. And there's a question of, can you do any kind of political work as long as the security situation is as bad as it is? I've arrived at the conclusion now that the chicken and egg question now has shifted to politics, that there is a need for a reset of the transitional government that makes it more representative, more effective, and that is actually now the essential first step. So I'm leaning, I've gone back and forth on this, but I would lean now in the direction of politics, particularly in the way that it most likely would be done. I think a lot of people were thinking of a large process, an election, or we actually toyed with the idea of a large national dialogue. But I think if it's going to be a smaller reset, which is the way it's headed, and I'll talk about that in a second, it makes sense to do the political reset, at least to have an effective transitional government first. The third is it's difficult to see the HMP restoring security absent international field accompaniment. There's a question now that's just looming of how much can the Haitian National Police, the HNP, do on its own? I think there's almost no one that I've met that believes that continuing to just train and equip the HMP, which is what Canada and the United States have both been kind of wanting to do. Neither side really wants to get involved. So they've tried to just hope that they can work their way out of this through an enhanced HMP. I think that's very unlikely. The gangs have amassed way too much firepower. They have a level of internal and local strength that the HMP alone will simply not be able to match in any viable scenario. So again, I think most people are now going in the direction that they need either an offensive force that would work in parallel to the Haitian forces to knock out the worst of the gangs or keep them at bay, or at least a very extensive accompanying force to go with them if they were to try to confront the gangs. So, but there's very few that believe that it could be done without some kind of very strong international assistance. Now, the other thing that was interesting to me as I was down there was that sanctions have been effective at divorcing politicians from gangs. There's a kind of a now what question, but it's pretty significant because there's been this really unholy connection between the gangs and political leaders. This has been going on since the 2005-6 period. Aristide was one of the ones that was most into this. He got very distrustful of his own institutions, so he would seek out gangs to be kind of his muscle, and that really has been the way to do business. And the elites, a lot of them have connections to gangs. It's a very nasty situation that is hard to break. But we have started to sanction different politicians that are involved in this sort of thing. It apparently has had some effect. It's had a chilling effect on some of the elites, and there's a little bit more caution about that. Again, it's one step on the road to some kind of a reset. There's a lot that still would have to go along with that, but it's something that is significant. And it's significant, I think, also because sanctions right now in so many places are so ineffective. Venezuela, they're not really having an impact, certainly not the impact we want them to have. They're having a lot of negative impacts. But in Haiti, they apparently have been, it has been something that has been effective. Fifth, the Haitian solution may only take us so far. There's a current obsession with finding the Haitian solution. Haiti is one of the countries for the Global Fragility Act. I'm happy to talk more about that if there's interest. But this is an act by Congress that recognize that fragility, state fragility, is simply a problem that leads to terrorism and migration, and that we have a humanitarian national interest, in my view, that leads countries in a direction that is just unacceptable to us. So we've tried to, through this Global Fragility Act, Congress wanted us to farm the lessons learned and the things that would help us to diminish state fragility. And there's a number of initial countries. There was one wave of countries 3 years ago. Now there's the second wave of countries, of which Haiti is the one in the hemisphere. So one of the big parts of the Global Fragility Act is Haitian solutions. We have to have Haitian solutions. We don't want to impose things on these countries. So I think we've gotten to the point where a lot of people, myself included, feel like that's just gone too far. I mean, we've waited 2 years for a new government, not for a great government, not for an election, just to have a government at all. I mean, it's a little bit out there to think that we just continue to wait for a quote unquote Haitian solution. If there was a Haitian solution, I think it would have been on the table by now. So I think we've kind of hid behind that as a way to not have to maybe not have to do as much. And I think there's a danger that we use that as a kind of a crutch again to get out of some of the hard work that needs to be done. There is a need, of course, to work from a respectful distance, but we should probably get to the point soon where we're at least going to act on those critical things. The sixth thing is the civil society really has tremendous untapped potential. That is a big change from when I was there in the 90s. And those of you that I know many of you travel to Haiti and know the country well, but I think that those of us that have watched it from a distance and then have been involved in different things have seen that there is now a growing potential among civil society group. The business community is also involved in, they don't want to dive into politics because it's like Venezuela is the same thing. The business community tries to stay out of politics because it's going to be a loser for somebody. But the Makaya Group, for example, is this new business association of young business people. And anyway, there's a lot of growing civil society potential. I would say, again, in a lot of these things, the depth of the destruction that the Duvaliers wrought on Haitian society just can't be underestimated. And I think, now we're in a situation where, it's been 25 years, but frankly, in the life of a country, 25 years, not all that long. It's 3 administrations for us. And to have a civil society that was that beat down was always going to take time. There is a chance of co-optation among civil societies. So tapping into it is kind of difficult. Outsiders have to tread lightly, but it is something that is noteworthy. There's more to work with, I think, now than there has been, despite all the other stuff going on, the gangs and everything else. There's a lot to work with. The seventh thing is a credible election. When everyone would like to see an election as soon as possible, nobody that I know thinks that an election in 2023 is possible. There's a lot of key things that have to happen first. There's a reset of the electoral council, the CEP. There's a lot of technical issues involved with preparing for a vote, and obviously security has to be restored. So anyway, 23 is pretty much out. I think 24 is actually unlikely. So I think we're headed, we're in a place where getting to an election at all, probably a 2025 mission. So it's going to take a while. It's an elusive goal. The United States, we love to just push people into an election and hope for the best. But in this case, that is not good. A bad election would probably at this point be worse than no election. But they do need a government. We'll get to that in a second. The eighth thing is there is untapped economic potential that would be good, I think, both to show progress and show that things are possible and would help to shore up the political transition. I've been surprised that the business community, and I know they're very controversial, but the business community that has stuck it out. I ran into a guy that who was actually who was in school with my son when we lived there, and he's still there, and he probably had other options, but stuck it out. They run a shipping company, and he's sticking it out. So there's a number of, again, kind of controversial because they're part of the elite, but that have stuck it out and are the ones that could bring back the factories and things like that. There's also an economic piece that I think we have to concede, and that is, I don't think everything we've done in Haiti has been wrong or bad, and I think a lot of it was well-intentioned, and a lot of it actually, in a very hard case has worked. But we were the ones that again, through a very misguided use of sanctions, destroyed the entire Haitian industrial capacity back in the last years of the Duvalier administration. And then we had the whole thing where we insisted that they kill all of their local pigs, and their pork industry never quite recovered. So we have had some things that we did for our reasons that have made things harder. And then the final thing is just that it's not going to be any easier next year than it is this year. I mean, we kind of have this idea that we just wait it out, somehow things are going to get better. I think that's not probably the best way to look at it. So just real quick, these are just us kind of my team musing about what needs to happen and how it might happen. So the if you look kind of bottom to top, there's got to be some engagement with the gangs. This is looking at security. How do you restore security? There's got to be some engagement with the gangs. That's going to be very tricky without empowering them, but it's got to be done. We can't just go in and fight them. The HMP's got to be empowered and newly equipped. And then there is a need for some kind of security force. So I would say those are probably the key elements of a security plan. And in there, we got these lightning bolts here. We break gang control and reestablish some sort of citizen security. Now, citizens are not involved with security at all in Haiti. Everybody talks about this, and we do a lot of these programs in USIP, community justice and security dialogue. So there ought to be something where citizens are a little bit more involved in that. And then we get up not to perfect security, but hopefully to at least adequate security. On the political side, we've toyed around with this, and we're actually jumping over all sorts of these things now, but we always thought there was a need for some kind of a diplomatic engagement. Could be the OAS. CARICOM is actually the ones that have finally emerged to do this. There's 3 former foreign ministers in CARICOM that have jumped up and been the ones that invited the Haitian leaders 2-3 weeks ago to Jamaica. It's Jamaica, St. Kitts, and Barbados, I think, is the third. The Bahamas is the third. So there's 3 CARICOM nations that have taken on this mission of being the kind of elder group that would help mentor them forward. That kind of pushed over a lot of these other ones. We thought of a political pact for dialogue. I think we're past that now. The confidence building, dialogue on politics, we jumped over those. So those guys, I think, are the ones that could have the best chance to get up to this 5th thing on the going from bottom to top there of an interim government, a reset of a transitional government. The one that is there now is not really functional, and getting us to a free and fair election, and then the constitutional reform, and ultimately political consolidation. This is a very, very hard process, but there are things working that could be the key to this. Now, I just want to throw this up, and Roy thought it was too much, but let me just to show that there is thinking being done, and there are some options that are probably okay. So this is just, without going through all the details, this is the architecture of the December 21 agreement. December 21, elements of civil society came forward and said we would like to participate in a transitional government, and that was basically to build out the current Prime Minister, Henri, with a more inclusive and effective executive branch. So just real quick, you've got the High Council of Transition. That was three civil society leader, a business leader, and a political leader. So Mirand Manigat is a former minister, and First Lady Laurence Saint-Cyr is in the business community. Calix de Floridor is a Protestant pastor from civil society. So that's the High Council of Transition. It has not worked. It hasn't been very effective, but that's the way to hopefully enter into some kind of power sharing with the prime minister. They would reset the ministries. There's a small acting legislature out to the left, and then they have the ability to do the electoral things that need to be done to run the election. And then down below them is the one that I would point out. Secretariat is just something that we added because we're actually providing some of the staff, and we want to make sure they understand how important that is to have this work effectively. But these roundtables are actually really interesting. And so in the agreement between Henri and the High Council of Transition, they built in these roundtables. There's a huge question about how does civil society and everybody participate in this reset, this transitional government. And this was a very creative idea that they had. It's now built in, but it just hasn't taken off. It hasn't worked yet. But it would be to have civil society, private sector, and political sector involved in some kind of roundtables around the country where they could offer their assistance, their advice, their support, and get connected to the government. This is something that there's not a natural way to do this in Haiti. Tragic the way it turned out, but in Afghanistan, there was a natural way, and that was the Loya Jirga. And that was something that everybody understood and knew. There's just not something like that in Haiti. So a lot of this has got to be created organically. And anyway, that's something that's on the books, and we hope comes around. So that's where we are. I think, optimistic, pessimistic. I think there is an awful lot of work to be done. There's a lot of people working on it. The U.S. Embassy there is quite effective to the extent they can get out. They have travel restrictions, but it's some really good people there. I was quite impressed by both the charge and the others. There's been an ambassador appointed. We can never get that through Congress. And the UN mission is quite good. There's a new SRSG, former foreign minister of Ecuador. She was in town last week. And the OAS mission is surprisingly good. The OAS has got a very effective special representative and staff, and they've actually been very involved in a lot of this. So there are internationals that are involved. Other countries have pretty good missions there as well. Again, the issue now is nobody wants to take on the security mission. We tried to foist it onto the Canadians. They quite aggressively rebuffed us, and there was talk of some kind of a coalition, maybe with the CARICOM. I mean, CARICOM doesn't do these sort of things. They'll join, but they're not going to lead it. There's talk of West Africans that could maybe put it together. Also not the kind of thing they do. I think without U.S. leadership on the security side, it's going to be very difficult to make it happen. So there may be a turning point. I don't know what catastrophe it would take for us to finally take this on, but I think it is going to take U.S. leadership to get to a point where the security could be reset as this political process hopefully continues to advance. So there's a lot of other things. Happy to talk in the Q&A. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
So if you can hear me, let me ask you the first question. We're not hearing a lot about Haiti these days. There's a lot of people in Haiti who probably would love to leave and come to Florida or somewhere in the U.S., but we haven't heard a lot about that. At the same time, there's a flotilla, so I've heard, of the Coast Guard that's surrounding Haiti. Are these two things connected?
So, I mean, if you look at the 90s, the real crisis was when Haitians were just leaving in such numbers and we had that very creative, weird solution where we picked them up at sea and then took them to Guantanamo. We had a whole base full of Haitian refugees in Guantanamo because we didn't want them to set foot on American soil. As I understand it now, I've heard from Coast Guard friends that we are, all but not embargoing, but we have quite aggressive naval asset, Coast Guard assets that are kind of making sure people don't even get that far. So there's other questions in this the whole Haiti conundrum, and that is what other resources are we using that, again, we might be better off at some point biting the bullet of trying to help restore governance and security rather than kind of working around the edges. I keep asking, how much worse, because you hear now about hunger. There is, I mean, Haitians are in a place of near famine. Their agricultural system has completely collapsed, and it's difficult to get almost anything in now. It's not, I mean, it's not impossible. There's some things that are getting in through the port, but it's hard. And so there's hunger. We see the same thing in Venezuela. I saw it last week. You've got, not only a stunted generation because of lack of protein when they're very little, but you've also got kids growing up without any schools. You got to start thinking about the long-term implications of that, having an entire society that kind of loses a generation. So, but one wonders, I don't know what the threshold would be. There hasn't been, a Srebrenica moment where we just decided, okay, we can't let this go any further. But it's to date, I think we've somehow just been able to push it back into the Haitian solution box and leave it alone.
So if there weren't this flotilla surrounding the island, how many Haitians do you think would want to leave Haiti and come to the United States?
Yeah, I think the numbers would be stunning. I think, they don't have an easy way to do it. And even in the 90s, they were somehow able to, they had the ships they could get far enough that they at least got picked up and then taken to Guantanamo. But I think there is, and again, that's another question of when does the desperation get so high that people do whatever else is going on, just start to leave in large numbers. Again, the other Srebrenica moment could be a boat that goes down with a couple hundred people on it or something like that. Again, I hope we don't wait that long. And maybe that is the value of having the Coast Guard there close enough that they know they're not going to get past anyway, so they don't try. But, again, in pushing them to not try, we do have an obligation, I think, to try to help with the internal problems that would make the whole thing unnecessary.
So it all raises a question of what is U.S. policy on Haiti. I don't see any leadership coming from the administration at this time. I don't even see a policy. I don't see any movement. Am I missing something?
Yeah, it is pretty much a policy of deflection. There's not strong leadership on it. I mean, it's part of this whole sort of anti-nation building. Again, I don't know what else to call it. It is. When we're trying to help a nation reset that has collapsed, there's nothing else to call it but nation building. And that there's such an aversion to that by the president himself, of course, and all the way down through the ranks. So I think there's an association with Afghanistan and Iraq that were so traumatic. I think they were both very misunderstood, but I think that's part of what is driving it. So we've tried to push it off onto other countries. Canada, we were hoping, I think, for a stronger role for Brazil. But again, I think given the scale of what needs to be done, it'd be hard to do it without the United States. Now, the UN can probably do more. And there is a possibility of a not a Security Council, but a General Assembly resolution that could set up the UN to do more. But they also have been kind of in the same place. They've been trying to push for other countries to, kind of a coalition of the willing sort of thing, where they, they don't actually have to do it, but they get someone else, they have somebody where it's not a UN operation, but they cobble together something from outside. So that's something that's still percolating. I just talked to somebody from the UN today, and there are options again for the UN short of a Security Council resolution. I thought you would have to have that to get the scale that you would need, but I think there's a way to cobble it together. And the OAS has kind of done the same thing. They've kind of called on, wouldn't it be nice if there was a coalition? Again, I think without the United States, that is going to be difficult. And the other thing that's looming there that is, I think it's going to be different this time than the last. There's kind of been two American interventions in the last 30 years. There was 94, and then there was the other one when Aristide had had, in our view, kind of gone a little bit rogue, and so the U.S. and the French and Canadians did a mini intervention in the 2000s, and to take Aristide and put him in exile, move on. That's very controversial, but neither of those had casualties on the international side. I don't think we had any casualties in the 94. We had one suicide. So and I think that's different now. I think even we would have some casualties given the strength of the gangs, although not a lot, because I think when the internationals show up, these guys tend to go to ground. So not a lot, but there probably would be just enough that, again, somebody politically would have to get through that. The Brazilians took a few casualties in the time they were there, as did the Chileans and some others. So that's an issue I think that's looming.
Could you talk about, Arnold Sherman asks about the effect of reparations on Haiti to free the slaves. The French collected a lot of money, I guess, over the years. How much has this crippled Haiti?
Yeah, that's a crazy story. I'll be honest, I wasn't aware of that the first time I was there. That very good New York Times reporting that came out about 2 years ago was really, they really told the story. The thing that I always thought was and I still think this may be even a bigger issue, was just the isolation that Haiti, coming out of overthrowing the slave masters heroically, then gets isolated from everybody else. It's French speaking in an English speaking Caribbean. It was a former French slave colony in an America that was terrified of a slave revolt. So, we didn't even recognize Haiti, and I think until right after the Civil War, during the Civil War, but they were just isolated. They had no real contact with anybody. And then the French, God bless them, came in and said, we need reparations for all the property you destroyed during the revolution. So it was a crippling thing. I think without the isolation, they could have gotten over it. But I think when you add reparations to isolation and to the very low level of functionality they came out of the revolution with, I think it was just a recipe for really long-term, dysfunction. I think by the 20th century, I don't know that I didn't think it went to 47. Anyway, whenever it ended, it was a really chilling thing for the country, and certainly a part of the legacy. Again, there's a lot of things that have been done to Haiti that we all could kind of have a sense of humor about the responsibility that we have to this country, because it has not been well treated, and there's so we get frustrated. People say, well, we've tried so hard and it hasn't worked. Well, that's nonsense. I mean, a lot of times we've tried the wrong thing, and a lot of times we have tried and it was getting in the right direction, and then we quit. So, there's a long-term accompaniment to this that I think Haiti needs, and we need to find the right formula to provide that, to give it the guardrails and the assistance in the right places, but doing it in a way, again, that is not everybody coming in 5 and 10 and 20 at a time on different trips to do some kind of a project, but rather building that state capacity, which it has just never had.
Should the French be paying reparations?
Well, that's one of the things that got Aristide in trouble. And when he got the second time he was in office, they thought he was really going nuts because he was going really hard over on this reparations business. I think if you added up the assistance Haiti has gotten, I guess you could argue that was something similar to that, but it's certainly, it's a country that I think is owed something. The Cold War is another part of this that we often don't want to come to terms with, but our support for Duvalier was very, very directly related to him being an ally in the Cold War. So that's probably not a great decision, but if that was the rationale, well, we had a reason then that there was a national interest we had apparently at the time in the Cold War that again led to Haiti having this really destructive government. I think there's a certain level of responsibility there.
And again, going to the French role, Joseph McCormick asks, he says, maybe this comes from right field, but what about a French security force? I think you mentioned that the French took part in one of the earlier security interventions.
Yeah, so there's the security part is really, and I've got a lot of details in my book because I was covering that really. That was a big part of it. I'll actually put a discount code in the chat if you're interested in the book. I can get you a 40% discount because it's still very high priced. It was done by a university publisher, but the French were part of the force, and everyone said, well, French speaking, that's the right thing. the most effective people on security were Haitian Americans by a long shot. And we had a contingent of civilian police that we just basically stripped out of every police force in the country, mostly Miami, Boston, and New York was the bulk of them, and then a handful from LA and elsewhere. But they were incredibly effective because they were all Creole speakers. They knew the country, they knew its culture. The Canadians that were French speakers always said that our guys were far more effective. And so the accompaniment part, something that's there. The French are not going to do this alone, and they're not going to do it instead of somebody else. Again, we're kind of getting desperate now and going to some certain West African countries that some of them have very good forces, but it would be very odd, I think, for them to come in and try to lead a force. And the leadership is what needs to start with. Somebody has to anchor the force, the logistics, and everything else. I think a lot of these forces can keep the peace when it's been won, but this is so complicated now, and it is a place of needing not just to keep warring factions that have signed an agreement apart, but it's a real mess of trying to restore security in a very complicated place. The French could be helpful, but not a panacea, and frankly, they were not the most effective in the last few rounds.
That too.
No, I mean, just because culturally, French is it's really not the language. I mean, they could communicate better than, somebody without any French, but again, they weren't standouts, of the ones you would turn to. Again, the Haitian Americans were just phenomenal. That was a real interesting story.
And that sounds like part of the solution. It has to be part of the solution from what you're saying, because it worked before, it makes sense. It's intuitively smart.
Yeah. There's, that's something that at least on the margins would have to be, I think could be done. Yeah, actually NYPD stayed with this project for a couple of decades. So there's been an NYPD contingent there for quite a while. So those guys, they were really quite something.
Another question from an audience member: what's left of the school system in Haiti right now? What's left of the health care system?
Yeah, again, that goes to the question of so much of this being in private hands. It's amazing that the people that have stayed, again, there is some foreign entities that have stayed in both the health and the education sector, but they have all but collapsed. Yeah, they are both in real dire straits. Kids are not in school. Again, we're losing a whole generation of education. So all those things would have to be really reset. And again, I think people need to think through how much of it is in private hands and how much of it is in the public sector. But there really needs to be a push. That was Paul Farmer's real conclusion: is the private hospitals, even that he was involved in, were fine for an emergency and a reset, but you really need to build those things into the public sector where they can flourish and be funded and have a long-term responsibility, and where they're available for people. I think right now there's a lot of schools in the private sector that are available if you can afford them, but it's just exacerbating the class tensions as well.
But realistically, how long will it take to start up the schools again? If you had security, if you had some calm, if you had a governing body, how long would it take to revive schools? Because that's a terrible.
Yeah, but I mean, the one thing that everyone that knows Haiti is struck by is the educational ethic of the country is just stunning. I mean, they just can't wait to get to school. And, you'd see, like in Cité Soleil, these girls coming out of this slum, walking beside sewage in an immaculate white dress with their hair braided, book bag or whatever. That was in the better times, but they can't wait to get educated. It's a very strong educational ethic. So I would say, it's just a question of logistics and security. Once security is reset, there's plenty of good teachers to go back to work. I don't think it would take that long to get everything up and running again. Health sector longer, because you've had a bottom out of the machinery for doing things, all the equipment and everything. So that's going to take a little bit longer. But again, a place with incredible energy, incredible work ethic, as well as the educational ethic. So I would say, again, if there was security across Port-au-Prince tomorrow, I think in a year you'd have most things up and running again. Again, it takes a long time to get them up to a good standard, but I think to be functional, I think it would actually go pretty quick.
How long would it take to get security?
Well, that is the big question. Depends on how you do it. There's a possibility of doing it wrong and it not working, and then you end up kind of worse than it was when you started. There's a question about how heavy the force ought to be, and there's a whole art to this. If it was the US, we would do it with a fairly heavy force up front, intimidate the gangs, retake everything, and then start to build it. But the reestablishing, or even establishing in some cases, security over the long, it's a long 5 to 10 year project. It's going to take a long time. The other things I think are a lot quicker because they're just, but that's such an intense thing that it's going to take a while. And I think people need to kind of settle in for that and just accept that this is going to be a very long-term thing.
You mentioned that security was more or less restored in 2017, and then the U.S. Pulled the plug on the UN peacekeeping force. I actually hadn't heard a lot about that decision. It must have been by President Trump.
Mhm.
Do you know what other places was the plug pulled from? Was there any debate? Did Congress have anything to say about it? Did the media? Did the NGOs? Because that's a crucial decision. That really the destructive act. Did anybody think through what the impact would be?
Yeah, I mean, what I actually did not notice it at the time either. But in retrospect, when you go back and look at what I understood is it was a reduction of peacekeeping budget overall. We just refused to kick in because the peacekeeping budget for the UN is some extraordinary amount of it is US 30%, 35%, something like that. It's a lot. So what I understood was we just reduced our share or our contribution to peacekeeping. And the only thing they could do was close a number of missions or reduce them. Haiti, it basically meant that we could no longer afford the troops. They had, I think it was 2,500 or so, military and police. Now, the UN was controversial too, because in the earlier period, just before the earthquake, they had brought one contingent from Nepal, brought cholera with it. That unleashed a cholera epidemic, which was horrible. And then there was some sexual predation in one of the other contingents up in the north. So the UN had a very checkered past, but getting over that, and those were two individual contingents among dozens that had been in and out of Haiti and had done well. So it was unfortunate that those. So I think the Haitians were kind of like, yeah, okay, this is maybe we're tired of these foreigners anyway. I don't know if they fought it. Nobody in the United States, I think, really resisted that hard, probably in the bureaucracy. And maybe we didn't know. Maybe we thought it was something that would be okay. But from the point of the earthquake, I mean, the Port-au-Prince prison just collapsed, and so you had hundreds of these criminals, hardened criminals, that had gotten out, and that was really the restructuring of the gangs when the prisoners got out during the earthquake, and they just never quite recovered, but they were at least getting to a point of some stability, or at least maintaining some stability, certainly not on a level where you'd have the assassination of a president and the total collapse of security in the hands of gangs. So it was at least something.
You've been to some pretty difficult places in your career. And I noted that in some of them you were a missionary. You were also was it the 82nd Airborne in the military, and then you went in as a Foreign Service officer. So you have a lot of points of comparison. Where does Haiti stand in the list of troubled countries that you know about?
I think I always thought that the two standouts were Somalia and Haiti. Somalia was the hardest. It was the hardest to see how this is ever going to come together, but it did come together. I mean, we got to give ourselves a little credit. We stayed with it. And some of these we say, well, we're too impatient. We're not going to stick around. Well, we actually do, because there's usually some national interest that draws us in. In Haiti, it was, of course, Somalia, it was Al Qaeda after 9/11. So we got frustrated with it and we took off, and we'll never come back. But sure enough, we do. And over time, Somalia eventually became a country again. The president was just here a couple of weeks ago. And it's low functioning, it's tough, but there's no substitute for governance. I mean, we in our country seem to be ambivalent about governance sometimes, but there's no other way to build a society that functions, rule of law, all the things you need for kind of the basic functionality. Somalia was not a place where that was natural. It was one of the tribal societies that was almost I call it resistant to nationhood. So that took a while, but kind of came together. The North started to Somaliland was trying to break away. There was a question whether there'd be a federation or not. There is a whole piece in my book about federalism as a way to build stability in some states like this. So anyway, Somalia was rough. Haiti was right next to it. I think Haiti was the other one that I always would have said was going to be the hardest and take the longest term assistance. So yeah, I would say of the ones a lot of them had just something they had to work through. Iraq, I actually call a low functioning or a low functioning democracy and a qualified success. I had a journalist almost fall out of her chair when I said that in an interview. But end of the day, Iraq did not break apart. It's still a country. It's got all sorts of problems, corruption and all the rest, but it is still a country, did not go through what Syria went through with its total collapse. And I think Afghanistan, if we had stayed the course, I think would also have been in that category of a low functioning but friendly democracy that could have gotten through some of what it faced, that we now have thrust it back into the hands of the enemy that we went to excise from it. So anyway, but Haiti also always just a very difficult case, but not with terrorists, not with the kind of violence that we have experienced in other cases. So one that I think just takes a steady, very, very long-term commitment.
So it sounds like in some ways it's the worst place on earth, or the worst off place on earth.
Pretty rough, yeah.
And you have to do something about it. I mean, once it gets to that location, you have to do something about it.
Mhm.
But it doesn't sound like anybody's doing anything about it.
Trying not to. The policy right now is one of avoidance, I think.
So what can be done to end the policy of avoidance and get active? Is the problem that there's the American government is gun shy now? It's had so many setbacks in Haiti. It's tried everything, and here we are in the worst off situation on earth. But it's our neighbor, and the United States is the giant in the hemisphere, and it can influence others. Clearly, this can't be beyond human capabilities to deal with.
Well, the question of how to get more attention, I mean, there was a question in the chat about the diaspora. I think the Haitian diaspora probably could do more. I think one of the things that's challenging is people don't know what to get behind. Like, what if you were to advocate for Haiti right now, what would you advocate for? Is it for an intervention? Is it for political? The political stuff is so complicated. Nobody really understands. I'm getting behind a process of political consolidation. Well, that's not exactly a rallying cry for a congressperson or a diaspora leader. So part of it is just very long-term, difficult, stuff of again, rebuilding a government that has collapsed. That's just a real technical, difficult thing. And I think it's hard for people to know what to get behind. The Black Caucus in Congress used to be the real champions of Haiti. That's no longer the case. Again, I think for lack of knowing exactly what to do. There's one Haitian American congresswoman in Florida that I think is interested. Again, I think is not terribly I think maybe just doesn't know what to do. So I think that's part of it is getting behind something. And then on the inside, I think again the bureaucracy is very, very gun shy. This is not an administration that would be willing to endure any casualties. So again, any kind of a security force that took some casualties, I think would be a real problem. And I think there is the narrative about nation building, about these assistance missions is so negative that it's again easy just to deflect. But I would build a narrative, which I hope my book helps do, of the many countries where it's gone relatively well, and we have been able to help a country to reset and get out of a challenging environment. So it's not something. There's a whole series of cases that have gone good enough. They're never great, but they've gone good enough. The Balkans, and I add El Salvador to it. It's gone in a weird direction now, but we certainly pulled them back from the brink in the 80s when the insurgents were ready to take over the country, and we walked them through a very long process that actually I think bore fruit. Again, Colombia is a great example, and a number of other cases in Africa where we got things to a good enough place. My Darfur chapter is also interesting. Sudan's gone in a weird direction now nationally, but in Darfur itself, we effectively stopped a genocide through an effective use of peacekeepers and diplomacy and sanctions. It was actually a really skillful policy that got us there. So we've done this stuff well in different places. I think we could maybe help the brand a little bit so that people are not so gun shy that, oh, this never works, let's not even bother. Well, yeah, it has worked, and I think we ought to bother. So
What do you, a couple of last questions. What do you assess as the level of corruption in Haiti?
yeah, corruption is really high, and really I'll put the discount code. Somebody asked for that. I'll put that in the chat. I hope that comes up here. And that's the discount code from the University of Nebraska, not for Amazon. If you go to the University of Nebraska, that's a 40% discount. So it gets it down to where it's kind of affordable. Not even my cousins would buy it at the list price. I really thought and I kept thinking it would come down, but it was a very stubborn price point. So the corruption is really an issue. Somebody asked about this corruption, Haiti Criminal Collusion Transparency Act of 2023. Those things are what I was mentioning. I'm glad he put the name in there because I actually didn't have it. But that's what has apparently been really kind of effective in, the people that have been colluding with gangs, and they're getting called out on that now. And I think that's something that has really been helpful in cutting off the gangs from their political masters. So that's something that I think we needed to do, and it's been helpful. So yeah, that's something that's been an effective thing. But corruption is just rampant. It's of all sorts of different kinds. We think of the suitcase under the table, but there's so many other ways that corruption, and this is true across the hemisphere. You think about a teachers union. This is not Haiti right now, but it probably will be. Colombia and Mexico are two places where the teachers unions are extremely strong. I mean, the teachers are holding back from being able to do any kind of educational reform because it doesn't, it is going to disadvantage them. And I think there's something where there's corruption of a different kind, kind where, again, you're hurting the institutions of government and things like that for personal gain.
What is the role of religion and religious organizations in trying to stabilize this very unstable place?
Yeah, I would really recommend. It's called "What Evangelicals Owe Haiti." It's in Christianity Today in April. I would really read that because I think it really answers well. And basically the narrative that it tells is that in the earlier period of Protestant missionaries are very, very powerful, not powerful, but very active in Haiti. It's one of the most active places I've seen in the hemisphere for mission activities. And it talked about how in the earlier period, during, I guess, and after the U.S. intervention, for however controversial that was, it was a period of a lot of building of a lot of stuff, both in institutions and in infrastructure. And it talks about, the way it tells the narrative was that in that time there was a real sense of trying to help build the Haitian state and help with the development of the government. So there would be this capacity to carry forward the business of government. And then that dropped off, of course, during Duvalier, because nobody wants to help that government. So all the stuff, but he was fine with it coming in privately because it kept the citizens quiet or whatever. So we just started this whole parallel governance structure that continued all the way through the earthquake. And that's what this author is calling out, is that religious organizations could rethink that a little bit and could be more active in the business of helping government. They had really creative examples like, could you give scholarships to the children of police officers? Not something that anybody would intuitively think of, but let's do the things that would encourage people to be police rather than just going in and building a private hospital, a private school, and things like that. It's a hard thing because corruption is so pervasive that a lot of people, they look outside government because they don't trust the government. His point is that we got to get to the point where we can trust the government, and we only do that by working with it. So that's one thing. But the other part of the religious organizations, it's just, there's a really vital role that is played there, I think, just in the connectivity with the United States. Again, isolation is a horrible thing for Haiti, and the missions and the religious organizations that are active there, they just bring hope. I was on the plane with a bunch of these people that had just done a mission trip, which I was kind of surprised about, but they were, as dangerous as it is, they still were determined to get down there. And it brings a bit of hope. It brings some connectivity, reminds them that the world hasn't abandoned them. And then there's a very interesting story, just came out yesterday, about this priest that has been negotiating among the gangs. A really interesting story. Cleveland-based or a Philadelphia-based, I think, priest that's been down in Haiti for a long time, and just got a gang agreement signed. And that's another role that religious organizations have played very effectively in Central America, was this role of trying to help to either negotiate or to temper the gangs, and get gang members to leave the gangs and lead a straight life. So they've religious organizations very effective in that as well.
How about Haitian Americans? I mean, the spokeswoman at the White House is a Haitian American, if I understand correctly.
She is, yeah.
So
Yeah.
are they doing enough? Are they putting pressure on their members of Congress and on the administration directly?
I think again that there's almost a lack of understanding or imagination about what needs to happen. Like, if you were to engage your congressperson, do you tell them, I think we should intervene in Haiti, I think we should support the UN? It's not. I think there's a lack of clarity and maybe just disagreement about what would need to happen. So I think there's a bit of a void based on, and that's why we at USIP, we've been really promoting this December 21 agreement. We've been saying, look, we've been waiting for the way forward. This is probably as good as it gets. Now you've kind of moved on a little bit from that to this Jamaica-led, the CARICOM process. But something in that realm has got to happen, and it's going to need American support. We have been very hesitant to get behind any of these things. So they're kind of coming and going. And I think a lot of people are waiting for a nod from the United States that, yes, this is the process. My last piece in USIP was just to compare it to one of the negotiation processes that I was involved in Somalia, that I thought was a pretty good model, where somebody just brings all the participants together and doesn't let them leave until they've got an agreement and there's a way to go forward. It's not like there's some long running insurgency that has all these different aspects to it that need to be sorted out in a lengthy peace process. This is really a question of government formation. There's the Montana group, there's the Henry government, and there's a number of other civil society organizations that would need to be at the table. But at some point, it's just a matter of getting them together in one place and building a new and hopefully more transparent, more effective, and more extensive government.
So one of the more intriguing questions, or this will be the last one, is does the U.S. Institute of Peace do peace gaming as the military does war gaming? And then I'll add my little half request to that. If you do, I'd love to see the game and the results. Have you done this? Because you're in charge of Latin America.
Yeah, we haven't done it on Haiti, but we had actually one of my guys designed it, and we just didn't have the bandwidth to carry it out. But we do peace games on a number of things. That's exactly what they're called. They're called peace games. We do some of those for Congress. And another, so we have things that we do to try to get the different, to get people together in a way that would allow for a new range of options to be presented. So there is something called the peace game, and it's something that if we do one, Roy, you'll get an invite. It's a very
please. In fact, Arnold Sherman, who asked the question, I think that's it's almost a suggestion, because one thing that might come out of it is, you could publish it, you could generate a discussion, you could give something to the Haitian American community and to the Black Caucus and to others who might be. I mean, I'm just thinking instead of just a terrible overall situation, you might actually have a sort of a formula and a roadmap for getting out. But anyway, I think that's what Arnold's suggestion is. So one of the things that you did tonight, Keith, is you've really given us an overview, not just of Haiti, but of countries in trouble in general, and the fact that American nation building has not been a complete failure everywhere, as the cliche goes, but it's been pretty successful in some places. And that Haiti is obviously not a case in point, but it does sound from what you're saying that the U.S. government should go back and re-examine its successes and try to apply all the elements of success to this almost unsolvable problem.
Yeah, I would again argue that there is a national interest in avoiding the kind of extreme state fragility that leads to either collapse or terrorism, pandemics. There's all sorts of things in the mix. And I think we've done better than we give ourselves credit for. I tried to outline, even in the hard cases that didn't look to turn out all that well, a lot of them, it's just because they had so far to go. These were very long processes of coming out of a brutal dictatorship like Saddam Hussein's, the Taliban. These were countries that had a very, very long ways to go. But that the guardrails that we were able to provide, the security assistance, the political reset, all these things, they had a lot to work through, but they have been the places where we've done a lot of good.
And I must say that what you said about Somalia was news to me, and very interesting that it's actually come a long way. I think, again, we ought to do a program on Somalia just to explore that. So, Keith, thank you so very much for your wide-ranging and incisive and analytical, but very descriptive account tonight. Thank you again very, very much, and thanks to the audience for your excellent questions.
All right, thank you, Roy. Thanks for the invitation.